Alright, I'll try this again and see what we've got. And not sure, we're having some kind of problem. I don't know what it is. But we're having some kind of problem on this end, so.
We got it.
Okay.
I think.
Alright. We'll hope that,
Starting all over again.
okay. Alright. I don't know, very strange.
Just a second. Try something.
Well,
Keep talking.
Let's see here.
Laura said they're having problems too. Let me see.
Alright, struggling a bit to get this one done. So,
Still not live. It's like replaying what you first did.
okay, I don't understand. Let's see. Well,
Wait just a second.
we'll have to hope we can get this done. I really do not know. We seem to be online, at least according to all the signals. So I apologize for the trouble. And we shall see what comes of it. So, alright, is it working? You don't know yet if it's working? Is it working? Okay. Alright, so, sorry about that. Boy, you missed some great stuff. You'll never know the difference. Anyway, appreciate my virtuous woman there for telling me that we weren't working, but hopefully we got it straightened out. I hope anyway. We talk about this great passage, and in verse 11, there are a couple of things here that I think are so important. In the first place, the heart of her husband does safely trust in her. The word trust is really tied to the idea. The root meaning of it is the idea of refuge, to hide for refuge. And if that seems strange to you, then just think a moment, because really it's a very similar concept. We live in tornado country, and when the storm comes, everybody goes down to the shelter if they've got one. And why do they do that? Well, they hide for refuge there because they trust in the shelter. And so it is with this good woman. She is trustworthy, and her husband knows that. And I think that's true across the board. There might be a specific application of that in our passage, but I really think that what he's talking about here is a trust that describes their relationship. Mr. Alden talks about how this woman has the full confidence of her husband because she's dedicated to her husband. And all she says and does is meant to support, to build up, to encourage, to affirm him. So what a powerful, precious gift that is. The Cambridge Bible sort of points to the sad opposite of that. In those notes, this point is made. The very first item in the catalog of good qualities is the rarest of all. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. The husband, in 9 cases out of every 10, does not feel very confident that she will do him good and not evil. And he sets a jealous watch over her and places every valuable article under lock and key because his heart trusts more in hired guards and iron locks than in his wife. Wow. Well, 9 out of 10. That's a pretty bad percentage. Maybe this fellow's just hanging out with the wrong crowd. But I don't think any of us could argue that at least that's true sometimes. And it describes a very sad substitute for what ought to be a marriage. We live in the age of the prenuptial agreement, and I don't know how widely that practice is held. I know you hear about it among the the high dollar folks, the crowd out in Hollywood or wherever it might be. Best I can tell, it's just a matter of working out the details of the divorce before you marry. And you think, boy, that's not very optimistic. That doesn't suggest much trust. But this woman, of course, is a far better mate, and her husband should be aware of that and blessed for it. What a comfort it is to know and to have a virtuous partner. Well, the other part of that passage talks about how that in particular he can trust her with money. He will have no lack of gain, the American Standard Version says, because she will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. There is an old saying, maybe some of you have heard it, about a woman. Some women have the ability to throw more out the back door with a teaspoon than a man can bring in the front door with a shovel. Maybe you've heard something like that, some version of it. But that's a rather sad picture as well of a spendthrift wife. Of course, it's not to say there are not plenty of spendthrift husbands. And I don't think there's anything in this passage that's trying to put the weight of financial planning and responsibility solely on the wife. That's not the point at all. But it's just an example of how the husband can trust in her, because she's not going to engage in behavior that's going to really put at risk the fiscal responsibility and the physical health of the family. If the woman, to put it this way, if the woman cannot handle money, the family's in trouble. That means she's responsible to fix it all, but it certainly means that she has a part in to play in blessing the family by handling the resources that come her way, and to do so wisely. And that's a critically important part of just living in this world, and what a blessing it is. She is good to him every day of her life. That's what the CEV says in verse 12. She's more than competent. She's devoted. And her devotion is pure. There's no competition. She's not trying to outshine her husband or elbow her way in front. That's her man. And his successes are her successes. And that's the way she feels. And so she is a conscientious and loyal helper to her husband. I like what the pulpit commentary said here, that all the days of her life, in good times or bad, in the early springtime of young affection and the waning years of declining age, her love, based on high principles, knows no change or diminution. She is one who does him good all the days of her life. What a gift. What an unspeakably glorious gift. And it's sort of an example of how evil adultery is. Just how terrible it is to betray such a glorious gift, precious gift. And she's not just a blessing to her family, but as the text goes on, we find she's a blessing to many. Well, verse 13. She seeks wool and flax, and works willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant ships. She brings forth her food from afar. The reference to the merchant ships has been understood in various ways and explained in different ways. I like what Mr. Alden wrote about this. He said, verse 13 begins the actual catalog of her activities, the detailed account of what fills the hours of her day and the days of her week. And judging from this, and verses 21 and 22 and 24, she spends a good part of her time in buying raw materials, spinning, weaving, sewing. Shopping, too, is a daily duty, just as it is in many places today where refrigeration is unavailable. She is compared to a ship that sails in distant markets with goods to sell and returns home with things that she's bought. Certainly that is true. This idea of what exactly he may have in mind there, but the idea of just like a merchant ship may have to travel a long distance, may have to face certain perils, make decisions. It has to be wise in how they handle their business. So she is. in handling the day-to-day affairs that really keep the family afloat, keep running. And I love that word willingly. She works willingly with her hands. This word really suggests the idea with pleasure, with delight, with desire. She's pleased to do this work. There are probably several reasons for that, but two of them that come to mind is she's good at it. And people like to do what they're good at. And secondly, she thinks it's important. And when you think your work is important and you're good at it, then it's not as hard to get up and go to work because you know you're accomplishing something, and it brings her pleasure. She's not bored with it or feel put upon by it. She feels accomplished by it. Being busy and being productive are not curses; they're blessings. And that feeling of accomplishment is really the gift of God. It's that industry, if you will, is something that helps us keep out of trouble as well. If we had more time, we'd spend more time on this. But in 1 Timothy 5, let me just mention this passage. In verse 11, Paul, many years later, is writing about the church's responsibility to help widows and to enroll them, it seems, in the number. And the point that he makes is that let younger widows remarry. Let them be busy and productive in a family. If you are too quick to support young widows and not give them a chance in that way to support themselves, you really tempt them to a life of idleness, and it'll be disastrous for them. Look at verse 11 of 1 Timothy 5. Younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation because they have cast off their first faith. And withal they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but also tattlers. The old King James says tattlers. We use that word, we think about our kids, as they're growing up, they want to tattle on their brother or their sister. But the original word in the Greek language comes from a root word meaning a bubble. And that was always helpful to me to get a grasp on this word of tattler. A bubble is empty. It's nothing. And there's some people, their speech is just nothing. They're just filled with meaningless, useless speech. Bubble speech. And he goes on to say they're also busy bodies. The word periergos is the word here. Two words, peri meaning around, and ergos meaning work. So the picture is that if you take a woman away from being productive, and I think this is true about more than just women, by the way, but in this case he's talking about young widows. If you take them away from the chance to be productive, what they do next is they wind up misusing their speech, and they wind up just getting involved and working around everybody else's business instead of their own, involved in things they have no business being involved in. And he goes on to say, rather I will that the younger women marry, bear children, guide the house, give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully, for some are already turned aside after Satan. And about that lifestyle, earlier in the chapter in verse 6 he had said, she that lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. But the point I'm making is, here's the connection between a loose and unproductive lifestyle as opposed to someone who it finds the work that they were made to do and who applies themselves to that and to who thus can be a blessing to their family as well as to others. There's a non-biblical proverb we probably all heard, and that is that idle hands are the devil's workshop. Same thing. If they're not busy about what God gave us to do, then we'll be busy about something else that may help condemn our soul. So verse 15 comes to mind. She rises also while it's yet night, and gives meat to her household and a portion to her maidens. This suggests something of her productivity, her busyness. In the first place, how many times in the scriptures do we find some reference made to rising up early? And how that is so often associated with being pleasing to God and productivity. Mr. Garrett, commenting on this passage, writes, "Arising before dawn obviously implies that she has none of the vices of the sluggard." Portion need not be taken to mean that she personally makes breakfast for everybody. But she may also be supervising the preparation of the morning meal, seeing to it everybody has their fair share. And all that, he says, comes out to mean she cares about the people working in her household. And she's diligent about overseeing and making sure that they're treated fairly and rightly. That's her character. That's a part of her virtue, her excellence. Verse 16, she considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hand, she plants a vineyard. I've heard this passage through the years, used to I suppose, encourage all kinds of decisions. I don't think this passage is talking about a woman who has got a real estate business that she's working at 40, 50 hours a day and putting her kids with somebody else and her husband so that she can, that's not the point. But the point is that here's a woman who certainly is sharp enough and well able enough and trusted enough to be able to take advantage of an opportunity. I don't think she's doing that outside of the supervision or the oversight of her husband, but working together with him. She can take the budget that she handles so well, and from that she's made space to be able to increase the wealth of the family and the blessing of the family. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard. She finds ways to be productive. She picks out a field and buys it. She plants a vineyard from the profits she has earned, one translation says. There are all kinds of things here that I think praise her prudence, her energy, her foresight. I don't think this is an encouragement to take her away from the family. I think this is a part of what she does in her role as the heart of the family. In the next passage in verse 17, she girds her loins with strength and strengthens her arms. The idea is that she's ready to work. And if she needs to get the flowing garment out of the way so she can move and push her sleeves up, she's more than ready to do that. She has the force and the energy to accomplish the work that is before her. So she's filled with that kind of determination and strength. Verse 18, she perceives that her merchandise is good. The candle does not go out by night. She perceives, literally she tastes, she knows by experience that what she has, what she produces, what she buys is quality. And we'll talk more about that kind of confidence as we go on in this lesson. Her candle does not go out by night. Both those things, I think, speak to, again, her virtuous choices. There's a satisfaction in a job well done. And I think this woman knows that. And so she has a confidence about her. And she has a work ethic as well. Diligent. And we sometimes say, talk about somebody burning the midnight oil. I think that could be said about this woman. Maybe the candle not going out by night is a variation of that very thought. Somebody put it this way long ago. They said, man's work is from sun to sun, but a woman's work is never done. Seems like that's true. The last one in bed and the first one up. In devotion to her family. Everything coming back to being a blessing to them. And where would they be without her? Tough to think about that question. She perceives that her merchandise is good, and her candle goes not out by night. Verse 19, she lays her hand to the spindle. and to hold the distaff. I don't know very much about ancient thread making, but it's interesting to read about such things. And if you're not familiar with these terms, the idea of taking wool, for example, and twisting that wool together and using a weight at one end to twist the wool together as it goes forth in order to make thread is an ancient practice, and one that still carried on in many places in the world today. I think in some cases, because we have lived in such prosperity, I certainly have my whole life. If you need some thread, you go down to the store. Surely you can find a Walmart, or they've got some sort of a sewing store. If you need clothes, you go down to here, you go there. But the idea of having to make what you wear, or to make a living by making and selling, and how are you going to make a garment? Well, you're going to have to first of all take the raw material and make the thread, and then put it together in order to make the garment. There's a lot that goes into that. It's time consuming. It takes a skill to do it and do it well. I thought this was interesting. I ran into this quotation talking about women in the Middle Ages. Now we're talking about 2,500 years after the time of Solomon. But this fellow said if you were a woman in medieval Europe, you would have had many chores to perform every day, such as cooking and cleaning and looking after the children and spinning. You would have needed to produce a large amount of thread, from wool and flax to weave into cloth for clothing, bedding, bags, sails, countless other items. To get an idea of the amount of spinning required for weaving, a piece of cloth just 1 yard square and woven at 25 thread per inch required 900 yards of warp thread and another 900 yards of weft. I'm just going to take his word for that. But if that's anywhere near right, that's amazing. That'd be a good part of the day that you'd need to spend nearly every day in order to create the thread that you're going to need to make the garments that are needed for everyday life. In commenting about this passage, several points were made. One fellow made the point that this is honorable, honest work. It may seem menial to some, but it's certainly not to be disdained. And certainly it wasn't, because we live in a society where that kind of thing is done for us. We tend to forget about, how people have lived through the years. But whatever equivalent you might think of in our daily life and experience, the things that you need to do to keep the family going, to produce the clothes, to wash the clothes, to prepare the meals, to buy the food, whatever it might be, all of those things have a dignity and an honor about them because of whom the service is given to. John Wesley wrote, by her example, she provokes her servants to labor. People who look at her and how hardworking she is certainly go away, if not more productive, at least feeling more shame for being lazy when you watch this woman work from day to day. Her personal habits are full of energy, Mr. Bridges said. And that's a good example for all of us, whatever our work might be. Verse 20, she stretches out her hand to the poor, yea, she reaches forth her hands to the needy. And this part of the poem reminds us that it's not just her family she works for, but rather she thinks about the needs of others. Industry enables her to be charitable. Hard to be charitable if you don't have anything to give away. But this woman works that she might give to those who are in need, just as Paul would command Christians today to do. The hand which is thus held out to the poor is precisely the hand which has been laid on the distaff and the spindle, not a lazy hand or useless hand, but a hand which is supple with toil, dexterous with acquired skill. It is the hand of charity. And it reminds us of New Testament principles. For example, in 1 John chapter 3 and verse 17, Whoso hath this world's goods and sees his brother have need, and shuts up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwell the love of God in him? Well, it's a rhetorical question, doesn't it? How can you claim to have the love of God in you if you don't think about other people, helping people when they're in need? This woman knows the love of God. Verse 21, she's not afraid of the snow for all her household are clothed with scarlet. She's not afraid of the snow because of the way her family is clothed with scarlet. There are different translations or different words that are used in different manuscripts there, maybe a couple of different translations that result from that. But taking the word scarlet, as in our translation, the idea of the highest quality of clothing. In some of the translations reflected in some of the ancient text, the word here is not scarlet, but the idea of a double cloth, and so the idea of an extra clothing or a thick clothing. But whatever it might be, she gives to her family the clothing they need, and so she has a confidence because she's prepared. Her family has warm clothing, so she doesn't worry when it snows, because it doesn't catch her off guard, because she thought about it before, and her forethought and planning and working ahead of time results in a security and a confidence. She's not afraid of the weather because she's provided enough. And that point is made several times in our section here. The confidence results from preparation. As I remember hearing a coach once who was asked about his players feeling pressure when they were called on to perform in a game. And he made the point, he said, my players don't feel pressure. He said, pressure is what you feel when you're called on to act and you don't know what you're doing. He said, my players don't feel pressure. They know what they're doing. They've been prepared. Well, that was a confident statement, but that's certainly true about this woman. Not much catches her off guard because she's thought ahead. That's a great lesson in life. I don't care who we are. That's a great lesson. Worry is swallowed up by provision. Verse 22, she makes herself covering of tapestry, and her clothing is silk and purple. You just get that picture of a beautiful home, well provided for. Tapestry, whether it be as some think for the furniture or for cushions or for the bed or quilts for herself, whatever it might be. Her home is well furnished because of choices that have been made, not by getting head over heels in debt, and not by accident, but by careful preparation and planning. Her home is pleasant to see and pleasant to be in. Pleasant for her family, pleasant for those who come to visit with her. The word silk is used in the King James Version, and that may be correct, but most seem to think that the word used here is a word which means something bleached, and most think that it's the idea of a white linen rather than silk as we sometimes think of it, although silk may have been introduced in the time of Solomon. But the point is that there's a dignity and an attractiveness about her home. I can't help but think about that passage back in the 7th chapter when a very different type of woman, a woman lacking in character, a woman filled with audacity and a lack of self-control, this adulteress says to her young victim, I have decked my bed with covering of tapestry, with carved works and fine linen of Egypt. Well, our woman here likewise has a beautifully decorated home, but for a different purpose. Nothing intended to be seductive here, but it certainly is a pleasant kind of environment that is attractive to her family, and a husband with any sense is not going to be tempted to look somewhere else when he has such a pleasant place to be at home, and that's thanks to her, I think, her quality. There's some men who ignore quality. We grant all of that, but at least she's done all that she could do. And in this case, I think it's more than enough. I think also about the contrast between this woman and the rich man. In Luke 16, we all remember that story, who was clothed in fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. This woman may have a house that she has furnished well, but she's in no wise materialistic or forgetful of those who are in need. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. He's well thought of and well respected, and the implication is that, at least in part, that's due to her. It's due to the kind of home that she provides and the kind of peace of mind that she gives to him, as well as the kind of virtuous life that causes people to respect him because they respect her. What a blessing she is to him. Never an embarrassment. Never an embarrassment. And I think about that in reference to 1 Timothy chapter 3, where you remember there the qualities necessary to be an elder or to be a deacon, but then likewise their wives must be. And he goes through a list there as well of a virtuous woman. Because if she lacks virtue, it certainly reflects on him. And likewise, if she is virtuous, it certainly reflects upon him as well. It's assumed by people that the head of so well-ordered a household must be a worthy man. That worthy woman helps make that possible. In verse 24, she makes fine linen and sells it and delivers girdles unto the merchant. Your translation may say, and maybe rightly so, she doesn't make fine linen so much as she makes fine linen garments that she might sell to the merchants, as well as providing for her own. She is productive, skilled, ambitious, and hardworking in that way. Verse 25, strength and honor her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Strength and honor, strength and dignity, as one translation says. Strength and self-respect. That's her clothing. You think about the fine linen that she might wear, or some other attractive garment that she might wear, modest and yet beautiful. But the real beauty is that, as Peter would write, the meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God a great price. In verse 25 again, she shall rejoice in time to come. She has that tranquility of mind, that confidence, because she knows she does the right thing and she trusts in the providence of God to be with her no matter what may come. Contentment in a clear conscience from wise choices is a great gift. One fellow wrote, she demonstrates a self-confidence born of right living. She isn't worried about tomorrow because, like the ant, she's stored up for food for the winter. Another wrote, her future causes her no anxiety because she knows the one in whom she trusts. I wish we had time to go back to Psalm 112. It's a great psalm, quoted in the New Testament. And it describes there the picture of the individual who puts their trust in God. Verse 6, surely he, this man that the psalmist is talking about, surely he shall not be moved forever. The righteous shall be in everlasting remembrance. He shall not be afraid of evil tidings. His heart is fixed, trusting in the Lord. It's like the woman that is described here. So, man or woman, someone whose heart is fixed on the Lord walks in confidence. Verse 8, his heart is established. He shall not be afraid until he see his desire upon his enemies. He hath dispersed, he hath given to the poor. His righteousness remaineth forever. His horn shall be exalted with honor. And you may remember the Apostle Paul over in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 quotes this passage when he makes the point that you can't outgive God. And if we give to God willingly, humbly, generously, don't think that somehow God's going to forget you. And so that's really a lot of the spirit of this good woman. She walks in a confidence that comes in a trust in God. Godliness with contentment, as Paul writes later, is indeed great gain. She opens her mouth with wisdom. In her tongue is the law of kindness. That's one of the most memorable expressions of all these great expressions about in her tongue is the law of kindness. Her mouth is open to give out wisdom, and the law of mercy is on her tongue. She speaks, one summarizes, with a gentle wisdom. Her language to those around her is animated and regulated by love. Could that be said of us, by the way? Every time I read this passage, I think, could that be said of me? Would the Holy Spirit say about Wes, in his tongue is the law of kindness. Her speeches are guided by wisdom and grace, not by inordinate passions. This practice is called a law. I think that's a really important point. It's the law of kindness. It's called a law in her tongue because, Wesley says, it is a constant and customary thing and proceeds from an inward and powerful principle of true wisdom. It's not an accident, and it's not just a once-in-a-while occurrence that she says something kind. That's the law of her tongue, and she abides by that law. Is that true of us? When she opens her mouth, it's not to gossip or slander or to engage in idle talk, that bubble talk we mentioned earlier. Her words are distinguished by good sense and discretion. She lovingly instructs those around her. Thank God for her, and may we all imitate her. The wise instruction and counsel she gives is so combined with kindness as to win rather than compel obedience. This is another important point that I wish we had more time for. But I do believe the New Testament teaches, and I think this is true, that a lady is under certain restrictions in reference to her behavior. That it is not for her to ramrod her will over some man, to out-argue him, out-shout him, as it were. Let the woman learn in silence with all subjection. But I suffer not a woman to teach or to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. I think one practical application of that is that, here's this good lady, and she knows what she believes, but she might feel herself restricted, and rightly so, not to get in a shouting match with somebody about that matter. She has the dignity to restrain herself, though her conviction is not lessened a bit. And that law of kindness also comes in here. And maybe here I am as a man pressing her in the argument beyond the point I should, and really putting temptation before her. I need to treat her with great respect as we reason together, and it's certainly proper to reason together. And I've learned a lot from good sisters through the years, some I'm related to and some not, who've taught me about the Bible and about life decisions and so on. Not denying any of that, but there's a grace that she has about her and a restraint she has, not to put herself in a position where she would be violating the will of God. And we ought to not do anything but help her do the right thing there. In her tongue is the law of kindness. Her skills are intellectual and spiritual as well as domestic. She's not just good at creating thread and sewing. She's good at life, spiritually as well as other ways. A woman of wisdom. She looks well to the ways of her household and eats not the bread of idleness. That point's been made over and again. This woman is not lazy. She's busy and busy about the right things. She looks well to, she gives attention to, she surveys, oversees. She is a house manager. If we had more time, we'd go through the New Testament and look at examples. 1 Timothy 5, verse 14, for example, talks about a woman guiding the house, ruling the house. She's not overlording her husband, but she certainly is a manager in directing her home. She is a keeper at home, working at home, likewise guarding her home by the decisions she makes and by her proper oversight in that regard. If we fail to recognize that the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world, we are certainly lessened by that oversight. And one of the reasons why we're in such a mess in our society, we've given up on that idea. We think if you're not making a dollar and if you're not in the spotlight, that you don't really count. And that just couldn't be more foolish, that thinking. 28:29, her children rise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, he praises her. And he says, many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. She is honored by those who know her best. It ought to be that way. God forbid it would fail to be that way. Sometimes that's true. I've told this before, and I'll mention it again quickly. Every time I read this verse, I think about something that happened before I got married. I went to talk to the elders of the church where I was growing up, asking them about how to be a good husband. I was pretty young, and I knew I had a lot to learn. And both of them gave me good advice. But one of the men, when I asked him about what's the key to being a good husband, he didn't miss a beat. He quoted this passage. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. He said, don't forget to let your wife know, and don't let her ever forget how much you appreciate her. And I've confessed before, I've done a sorry job of that. But I believe that's exactly right. And that's true in reference to this woman. She deserves to be praised. Children need to, as they're growing up, be taught to appreciate, for their sake, all that their mother does for them. If they have a good mother, then she needs to be praised for that. Every good woman deserves to feel special because of the great sacrifices that she makes for her husband and for her children. And finally then, verse 30 and 31, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And give her the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Give her credit. Praise her because she's special and she's a gift of God. Beauty and favor, charm, grace, beauty can be deceitful. They can fade. Those things can. Deceitful. You have a list here. When I was a kid, I can remember seeing different places, not looking for them, but seeing people talking about the world's most beautiful woman. And when I was growing up, there was a famous actress who was considered the most beautiful woman in the world. And I can remember no more sense than I had, thinking, well, if she's the most beautiful woman in the world, why has she been married 8 times? Looks like we got a disconnect here somewhere. What do you mean beautiful? There is a beauty that can be deceitful, and there is a charm that can be vain and fleeting, and then there's a character and a core of an individual that's worth more than rubies, than all the money you can come up with. There's another non-biblical proverb about not judging a book merely by its cover, and I think that applies here also. We saw in the 11th chapter of Proverbs in verse 22 a jewel and a jewel of gold in a swine's snout. Yeah, that's like a woman, a beautiful woman, fair woman, without discretion. That character is so important. It's not to demean appearance. It's not to suggest that looks don't count or that's somehow a negative thing. If you've ever read the book of the Song of Solomon, you know there's a place for romantic love, and there's certainly a place for beauty, physical beauty. But how empty that is if there's not coupled with that the character and the quality that is and should be so highly prized by wise people. At the root of it all, her faith surpasses every charm and every beauty, every other beauty that might be there. And that's absolutely true. A woman that fears the Lord, The secret of this good wife's industry and business acumen and reliability and kindness and goodness is she fears the Lord. Find a woman that fears the Lord. That's the lesson that young men need to learn from this. And then give her everything that belongs to her. The truth is that despite best efforts, it so oftentimes, sadly is true, that we grow up before we realize, looking back, how much we owe. Try not to let that happen. Don't wait too late to say thank you. But just realize this too, that all she didn't do just to hear thank you. She did it because she loved. That's her quality and her character. But she ought to be praised because she is a woman of virtue. And thank God for her. So let me conclude this chapter in our study with 2 quick points, and I appreciate your patience. I like what Smith wrote here. He said the description of the virtuous woman serves in 3 ways. Number 1, as a challenge to young women. I think that's true. There are a lot of virtues here that I think speak to men as well as women, people. But certainly to the young woman, here's a goal to seek out and to be like and learn from her. The second place, a hallowing of domestic life. And that's true. Her greatness is not in that she's President of the United States, if that were proper, or that she were queen over a country. Her greatness is found in the service that she renders to God and to the community through her home. And in the third place, it certainly speaks to young men to know what you're looking for. And what you ought to be looking for is virtue. One fellow put it this way. He said, who can find a virtuous woman? Maybe we ought to first ask, who's looking for one? Who's looking for a virtuous woman? You know, if you're looking for some woman who just simply has an appeal to the eye, or you might find her cute little temper cute, you won't find it so cute once you marry it. But if you're looking for a virtuous woman, you know, God help you to find that. And if you do, you are blessed. And that's our final point. That as this book of Proverbs closes with this great poem about this virtuous woman, I don't think that's accidental. I think all through the book, from the very start, we read about Lady Wisdom calling to us to come to her that we might be blessed, that she might give us direction and guidance. And that's right. And so at the end of the book, we find here a virtuous wife who is a part of that picture of wisdom and a gift of God, just like Lady Folly at the beginning of the book, who's trying to lead people astray. And then you find through the book literally women, the adulteress, the huntress who's looking to seek the precious life, trying to lead men astray. You find, I think, a parallel there. This great woman that becomes a wife and a mother and a blessing to the world is the embodiment of wisdom. And thank God for her. Thank God for this book of wisdom, and may the Lord help us to put these lessons into practice. I very much appreciate your kind attention, your listening, and I hope that you found some value in this. It may be that we take this study up again at some point, and we'll make an announcement about that. Maybe we'll start over in Proverbs at some point. But for now, at least, we'll say goodbye. Thank you so much, and